chess is more than just normally bringing out the pieces, making sure that they're well positioned. Sometimes you can allow those pieces to be badly positioned, meaning they would make them temporarily bad pieces. And why people are doing this? They're doing this so that in the long term, these bad pieces eventually become very good pieces. So you're probably wondering what on earth this guy is now talking about. Let me just show you one example. And this is going to be like introduction of today's bootcamp, what I'm talking about. So let me take an example. The Bogo Indian. Here, knight f3, bishop e4 check. So let's say you're playing this opening. Hello, Santi. You're playing this opening, and the first question that you have here is how do you want to defend from the check? Now, the natural response is bishop d2. Why? Because knight c3 allows you doubling the pawns, and knight e2 is just making the bishop looking bad, right? And this is how many people are playing. Because after bishop e4 check, yeah, a lot of people respond with bishop d2. After bishop takes on d2, I mean, there's queen e7, a better move, but whatever. I just want to show the idea. Many people respond with knight e2. This is very basic. Unfortunately, it's very basic, although white has made all the normal looking moves, meaning he has defended from a check with a normal developing move, and he has taken on d2 with the bishop with a tempo, thus developing a piece. And yet, white's position is not ideal. Can you believe this? And if black would know that white is going in this position, black can enter this position. For example, he normally plays something like, let's say, d6, whatever you do here, e3, e4, castles, bishop d3, let's say queen e7, castles, and e5. Black is doing fine. Actually, for this position, black doesn't have the dark swap bishop on e7, which doesn't allow him to carry out this idea. So this leads us to the introduction of the temporarily bad pieces. Let me show what I'm talking about. So after bishop b4 check, a very strong move apparently is knight e2. And you're looking at this and there's like a question, how come this is a good move? Because we are closing the bishop on c1, right? This is probably a very bad move. But what I'm about to show you is that we're thinking a bit further, that we want to keep this bishop alive. And then in the long term, we might have a two-bishop advantage. So for example, black responds with b6, which is a very common structure for various queens in and positions. Now we play a3. So the bishop has to go somewhere, right? Let's say if the bishop retreats to e7, white just clearly takes the center, followed by bishop d3, b3, or even b4, bishop b2. And thank you for the considerable space advantage. So probably black is going to take it. And instead of the automatic trade with the bishop, again, we are going to show we're thinking deeper. We take with a queen. And again, after queen takes on d2, the obvious question is, how come? I mean, this bishop on c1 is a bad piece. But again, by playing this move, we are clearly showing that we're thinking two moves ahead. Because this bishop, of course, is not going to stay on b2. But, for example, after short castle, do you play either b3 or b4? I mean, there's some nuances, but let's say b3, bishop b7, bishop b2. And this is just one example to introduce you to the topic of the temporarily bad pieces. And in the end, you might ask yourself, what did we get from this? Why this is even necessary? That's a very important question, because let's go back to this position. If you would play bishop d2 and take with the knight, what do we have? The position is about balanced, but we have, I use this term very often, chained together the knights. And I believe that chaining the knights together for no good reason is a bad idea. And why is this? Because they're not helping each other. I always have believed that the knights should be standing like they're crossing paths, meaning one knight is on c3, the other knight is on f3, they can jump forward without interfering with the other knight. And by doing this, they're controlling more squares. And here we have chained the knights together. They're feeling more or less secure. But if you start to count the number of the squares they control, you're gonna very quickly figure it out that this is controlling less squares. Right. So in the end, what happens here after this maneuver? We are showing a deeper understanding that the bishop belongs on the long diagonal. So not only we have not chained the knights together, we have established ourselves a very nice pawn center, and we have kept the two bishops. And actually about the two bishops, this is something I have talked about in another bootcamp, the power of two bishops. And I'm not gonna probably discover a moon or a bicycle from scratch. Two bishop advantage at least a professional circuit is a very popular weapon. I mean, if you don't know how to master the two bishops, well, I strongly recommend you to watch one of my previous bootcamps and study it. And this would be actually a very nice way where to take from here. For that reason, could I take by queen and put the knight on c3? Yes, absolutely you could. That's a very valid question. After bishop d2, very often in these positions, queen takes on d2 is even better than knight b to d2. But then again, you lose the potential to get the two bishop advantage. Right? So again, this is the reason why sometimes we can deliberately enter a position where we have a temporarily bad piece on c1. This is a bad piece, right? But we're thinking further that we are going to play a3, b4, bishop b2 or b3, whatever, and this bishop on b2 is going to be a stronger piece than the knight on c3. How about that? Let me show you one more example in exactly the same style. There's going to be better examples maybe than this one, but I just want to do some introduction first. Just a second. Oh, sorry, my bad. Just a second. Let's start with this one. So there's another opening. For example, the Moscow ration or the so-called anti-Najdorf, which is a very, very popular topic of mine. I played it pretty much all my professional career. And now the question is, how exactly is Black going to deal with this? So of course, there's nothing wrong with the normal developing move bishop d7. After bishop d7, take it, you can follow with the same pattern. You can play queen takes on d7, followed by knight c6, knight f6, not chain the knights together, and by doing this, Black gets a pretty reasonable game. But you're probably wondering, if this was working in the previous line, the Bogo Indian, why can't I do it right here? And the answer is, you can do it. And that's why knight e7, at least at a good level, is considered to be the principal choice. So Black makes this very strange move, knight e7, closing the bishop on c8, but he's thinking deeper. So he's gonna play a6, and after bishop d7, he keeps the two bishop advantage. Hello F, and thank you for the sub. Appreciate that. Right, for example, let's say White doesn't know what's happening. He plays should castle. You play a6. So now, if you retreat, Black is enjoying an extra tempo for the knight on d7. Takes. Let's say White plays something like d4, c takes, knight e4, knight f6, knight c3, e5, knight f3, h6, whatever. This is not really the best line, but that's just to give you a point. So Black in the end has gotten the two bishop advantage, and he is hoping that in the long term, these two bishops will overcome your two knights. How about that, right? So that this actually leads to a very interesting struggle. After a6 or here, White can give up the bishop, but then he has to show what he has for it. So very often there's like a couple of theoretical rules conflicting with each other. One of them is, I have a lead in development, like I'm playing with White, I should be opening the position. And the other rule is, I have two bishops. I'm behind in development, but if I have two bishops, I should try to open the position. right? And it's very, very interesting struggle here, but that's not the topic of today. I already talked about it in the Two Bishops bootcamp. So this is like a warm-up to you. Now, the theoretical part of today's bootcamp, it's mainly going to consist of two parts. The first part is the most common piece, which is the so-called temporary bad piece. That is the bishop. I mean, very often, indeed, that is the bishop, because we lock it voluntarily ourselves for a very good reason. And the second most popular piece, which sometimes is a temporary bad piece, that is the knight. I mean, I was going through a lot of examples which I was thinking to show to you. I realized mainly it's the knight, mainly it's the bishop, but other pieces like the rook, like the queen, I mean, sure, sometimes this happens, but it's not a very common thing. All right, let's start with the bishop. So I'm going to start with the first example, which I have prepared for you. And let's start with this one. Some of these games, they're going to be my games. Yes, the Marozzi Bind Lemmings player also I'm going to include. And actually, we're about to enter the Marozzi Bind. So here, Black has played Queen E7. And he's thinking about some active ideas. Like D5, like exploit the lead in development. Well, let's imagine yourself, you're playing this position like normal people should play. I mean, let's say you knew the opening and you got to this position, you know nothing about temporary bad pieces. And you look at this position and you're thinking, okay, listen, my pieces are underdeveloped. I should be developing them somehow. So you're thinking, okay, the bishop is standing on F1, probably I want to develop it somewhere on C4. Let's say you put the bishop on C4 because it, I don't know, fights for the D5 square, right? Some Scotch idea or something, right? Let's say Black plays a short castle, you play a short castle, Black plays, I don't know, something like D6, you play Knight E2, Black plays whatever, Bishop E6, and then you just play out this position like nothing happened. And I think that you missed a great chance to get something more out of this position. So again, there's nothing wrong with White's position, but you don't have any advantage whatsoever. So the problem was we did not understand what is more pressing matter in this position. So it's not even about developing your pieces like you put the bishop on c4, you put the knight on d2 and make check, right? I have developed my pieces. We have to think deeper. And this is where steps in another very important topic, which I don't think I really have talked about it in my bootcamps. That is the space advantage. I have to check. Have I done space advantage bootcamp or not? Because it's very important, very often, to grab a lot of space and essentially try to squeeze the life out of your opponent. And again, this is a huge topic in chess. If you don't know that, I definitely recommend you paying attention to this. And here we can play c4. And you know, you look at this move, c4, and you're like, what is this? Well, I might have a big spaceman. Not sure what you mean. So you're looking at c4, and you're saying, listen, this is wrong. I mean, this is so wrong because I'm imprisoning my own bishop and I'm weakening the d4 square, right? And it's very easy to discard this move. But then again, we start to think a bit deeper. Why are we even playing c4? There is one idea. If White is a bit careless and at some point he plays bishop e2, you need to watch out for the following idea of d5. Now, since you haven't fixed your center, you can't take with a pawn. The knight is under attack. You have to take a guess with the knight. Take it. Taking with a queen is extremely risky business because it's not very clear where you're going to position your pieces while your queen side is underdeveloped. So I guess you have to take with a pawn. And now there could be a lot of moves. There could be queen c5 check, king h1. There could be something like rook d8. You play c4. There could be I don't know, there could be knight e5, c6. And while you'll be struggling to continue your development, your opponent is very active. Okay, maybe here this is not the best example, but you get the point. So this is yet another reason why we are playing here c4. We are entering the realm of so-called Marozzi bind. So the Marozzi bind is pawn on c4, e4 against the pawn on d6. And while we do make this bishop bad, we are not allowing him any business with breakthrough in the center. So also you might have an argument, but listen, what about the weakening of the d4 pawn, a d4 square, right? What about it? You're like, listen, he is going to play something like, I don't know, c5, knight e4, and keep the knight there. But how is he going to do that? So I'm going to play knight c3, queen d2, let's say rook d1. You're never going to get your knight on d4. Because if you want to do this, I have no idea how even to do this. I mean, let's say even in some scenario, you play d6, c5, I land the knight on d4. All it takes me is just one move, knight c2, you're gone. And black is left with multiple weaknesses in his position. So there's that. Alright, let's continue to check how this game continued. Queen b4 check, take, we take with the king. And this leads us to another reason why c4 is necessary. You understand what I said about the knights? We want to always develop them on the third rank so that they control more squares in front of them. And this c4 also enables knight c3. So that's why after queen b4 check, queen d2 take it, we take with the king. We do not take with the knight, which again would make it like check mark. I took with the knight and I have continued my development. Well, great for you. But if I would ask you, what is the knight doing on d2? Well, nothing, is it, right? It's doing nothing on d2 because it's staring at the pawns. On b3 it has no future. And maybe you could automatically take on d2 and convince yourself that you have made a move with a tempo, and then you would fix it anyway, and maybe play something like knight b3, knight e4, whatever, knight e2, knight c3, and still land on the same square. That's why once again in chess it's extremely important that we're thinking a couple of moves ahead. So that's why king takes on d2, the queens are off the board, we can take with the king, we want to play knight c3. And this leads us to the following position. Knight e4, threading with a fork. King c3, why not? There you go, you can actually have your square of d4, right? It makes perfect sense. But if you, again, pay a bit more close attention to this position, black cannot keep it. I'm simply going to play knight c3, rook d1. And how on earth is black going to hold these pawns? They're fixed weaknesses. You have learned to castle, now you're giving up your castling rights. But listen, Dan, if I would ask you, why do you castle? What's the sole purpose for castling? I think there's two major reasons why people castle. First, bring the king to the safety. Second, connect the rooks. That's it. There's no other reason. I mean, actually, it's just the king's safety because you can connect the rooks either way. And that's why here we are taking with the king, right? Because this king is feeling safe. It's actually a piece. So why don't we think a bit further? We don't have to make this long castle check, meaning I can't play a game without making a castle. That's why I feel like I have to make a castle for the game to be complete, right? No, you don't have to do that. All you care is about how your pieces are coordinating together. So in the end, let me just go back to the original topic. Look at white's bishop. Look at white's bishop. It's standing on bishop d3. It's staring at these pawns. In the end, white decided to allow the knight trade. Look at this, a4, right? And this is completely nuts because white is positioning all of his pawns on the color of the bishop. And you're watching this, you're probably thinking, wait a second, what is white doing here, right? Because, I mean, you should be normally giving the bishop long diagonals. Well, what if I would tell you that in this position, white is doing this on purpose? Why? Black has no counterplay, exactly sledgehammer. So first we're squeezing the life out of the opponent. And this leads us to the original topic of the bootcamp today. What is a temporary bad piece? A temporary bad piece is something which is perhaps not looking great right now, but it has a future in the long term. So if you look at this position more carefully, you realize that the position is not static. Like the Lemmings player is saying, the pawns are mobile. You can put the pawns on the light squares temporarily to squeeze your opponent, not to give him any counterplay. Look at this. There's no d5, there's no b5, there's no f5. g5 is ridiculous. So ask yourself, what is black even supposed to do here? Because every single good player, he wants to have a clarity, he wants to have a clear plan on the board. Of course, some club level players just like to shuffle the pieces, whatever happens, happens. But I do believe that most of us players, we want to have a clear plan. And if black has no clear plan here, there is no so-called pawn play, because I do believe that a pawn play, in the best practice, is you push forward the pawns and pieces go behind. This is the best practice you can do in chess. And if you have no pawn play, you're just static. And your opponent does with you whatever he wants. And this is exactly what happened in the game. So what if I would tell you, I won this game because of this bishop? Would you believe me? I won this game because of this bishop on d3. It became a monster. So very fast showcasing how the game continued. White was gaining space. The pawn on a4 was taboo. Bishop b3, rook a2, rook e2. Black is shuffling the pieces. He has no counterplay. At some point we are landing the knight on d5. So there's the pawn on c7 under attack. We can always improve this bishop by playing f4 and put it on f3 if you want it on h3. That's what it makes a temporary bad piece. It's not permanently bad piece. Yes, after a lot of trades, we get the killer bishop. Look how it happened. Now it looks like a pretty okay piece, right? So it's still sort of a bad piece. How about now? A lot of space advantage for white. And in the end, the game finished. I think it's really illustrious how in the end the bishop came to dominate the knight. Right? So it started out, again, let's start with the starting position. It started out being one of the worst pieces on the board, but again, we did this on the purpose. I hope you understood why we did this. We did it to squeeze the opponent. We did it to take space advantage. And we did it to remove our opponent any counterplay whatsoever. And we understand that this bishop is temporarily bad. Yes, it's not a good piece. But we also understand that in the long term, the space advantage is far more important than the momentarily the qualities of this bishop. And that's why it's very difficult for you to play it out correctly. For example, you will play bishop c4, which seems like a normal move. But unfortunately, this move has nothing to do with the space advantage. I already showed you there's moves like d6, bishop e6, d5 is going to be in the cards, and you're going to walk this moment without even noticing it. All right, let me show you another very similar example. And actually, this game was the first game. This is my game, what I played. It gave me a very good understanding of this structure. And then I played another game many years later. This was a rapid game. There was this ridiculous idea of Jeffrey Zhong in the accelerated dragon bishop h6 trick at some point. Okay, I think I recorded the video on YouTube. You can check it out. Jeffrey Zhong gives bad opening advice or something. However, I titled it, and again, it's exactly the same structure, right? We have the bad bishop. Opponent has supposedly the good bishop, right? And the good knight and whatever. But again, I'm asking myself, Where's black's counterplay? Where is your pawn play? d5? Forget it. b5? Impossible. f5? Yeah. Yeah, maybe f5, right? But it opens the bishop on d3, does it not? So are you going to play f5 or not? So in the end, how did white play out this position? Now look at this. You're going to recognize the same pattern. You recognize this? Because this is exactly from the previous game. We make sure there is no counterplay for black at the queen side. White can even play a4, put the bishop on c2, and then bring the bishop into life, thinking about some moves like f4, e5. In the end, black tried to create a blockade on the dark squares. White played g3, bishop e2. And look at this, actually white says, listen, I don't want to allow you to trade your good knight against my bad bishop, because I understand that in a couple of moves, this very bad bishop will be much stronger than your very good knight. So bishop e2 was played, f4 was played, and bishop f3. Now look at this, how the situation has changed. So this knight has no good squares, because on c5, yes, it stands nicely, but what about e5 threat? Let's say we could have like rook c, knight c5 here, let's say something like rook c7, e5, whatever, takes. Do you see how the situation has changed? Now we have a monster bishop on f3, which is instrumental getting to the weaknesses of the black's queen set. Think about ideas like knight b5. The knight goes, the pawn on b7 falls. Right? Again, it's just an idea. Sure, maybe the execution could have been better. Maybe black could play something like bishop f5, threatening with knight e3, whatever, but you get the idea, right? Because this bishop on f1, it's not a bad piece. It's just a temporary bad piece. But we are thinking that since the position is not locked, our pawns are mobile, in the end, it's going to come out. All right, let me show you more. On this game, I actually saw previous weekend. Because there was my teammate, Valery Kazakovsky, playing for Yoda Balta, our team in Lithuania. He's a grandmaster from Belarus, but he moved to Vilnius, Lithuania, a couple of years ago. And he was playing on board 2, I was playing on board 1. And Maxim Novik, a Russian grandmaster, but he also now represents Lithuania. And look at this. Now, in this game, there is a struggle. White understands that this bishop on b2 is a bad piece, temporary bad piece. Yeah, which I saw you. I saw your games. Hello. So white says bishop b2 is a bad piece, but why is it positioning the bishop on b2? Why, for example, white is not doing something like normal, something like queen c2, short castle, e4, and bring the bishop out, which makes sense, right? Well, here white, the grandmaster Maxim Novik, he says, listen, I know that my bishop on b2 is looking temporary bad piece, but in the future, in like, let's say 5, 6, 7, 8 moves, if I manage to play c4, how exactly is black going to counter this powerful Daxo bishop on the long diagonal? Now, this is really deep thinking, right? Of course, Novik didn't invent this idea. This idea is known. So you position the bishop on b2 in many openings. There's like the Granfell, there's the Nimzo. Very often you position the bishop on b2, which is staring at all of these pawns and has literally no squares. And yet white says, listen, this bishop on b2 is going to be a monster in several moves. So here, Kazakovsky with black, what he did, he tried to undermine white's strategy. So he took on d4 before white can respond with c takes on d4. For example, if white will be able to castle short, c takes allows c takes. And then after e4, white not only has the center, but he has the monster bishop on, sorry for the arrow, on b2. So that's why Kazakovsky took on d4. He played b6. He played bishop a6. And now his idea, he's basing his entire strategy. He wants to make this temporary bad bishop permanently bad. How to do it? So Black's setup, Black's dream idea is to block c4 square. So he wants, let's say, to land something on c4, let's say rook c8, bishop c4, or maybe in some dreamland, let's say he would love to get the knight on c4. If this happens, if Black indeed is able to trade the last square bishops, land the knight on c4, land the knight on d5, and leave White with the bishop on b2, we can start to talk about not about temporary bad bishop. It's permanently bad. Why? Because it has no easy way to join the game, and it's staring still at those pawns which are blocked. Of course, the blockade could go away, but probably it's permanently bad piece. And that's why in this game, the struggle was, is Black going to be able to block this pawn, or if White will be able to play c4 and open the bishop? Very interesting struggle. So Black played rook c8, a4, stopping b5 idea, fighting for these squares. Knight e7, rook e1, rook c7, bishop takes, queen takes, knight e2, right? Again, White wants to play c4 d5, because if you open this bishop, you get a lot of possible ideas for a kingside attack. This is what makes a bishop really powerful piece, because in open positions, it simply controls more squares than the knight. So of course, Kazakovsky said, listen, this is not going to happen. I'm going to play b5, I'm going to play knight b6, queen e2, pinning the queen. Here, another great move by Novik, rook b1, applying some pressure here. And in the end, Black had simply no choice. He had to play queen c6, take, success. You see that White has completely outplayed Black. This means that Black's strategy to block this bishop has failed. So White in the end simply has a strong bishop. White has a potential target on a7 and a small center. This in the sum gives White a solid advantage. And the game could have continued here until this moment. White was playing top-notch chess. King f1, knight b6, bishop a5, rook c6. And about here, Novik faltered. Yeah, I guess he didn't understand how his position is, how good. He took on b6 many times and the game finished in a draw. So that was probably a relief for my team, but the disappointment for Novik's team. What he could have done. I mean, bishop b6 is fine. Rook b4 looks very serious alternative. What he could have done after rook takes on b6, he could have played simply rook a1. Keep more pressure. And for example, a6, here, here, here. You see, this rook is passive. This pawn is easy target. King d3, knight e5, king c4. White has a very easy game. Or maybe even knight b6, try to snatch the pawn immediately. This would make really one-sided game where Black is struggling. So this was like, I was really impressed when I saw this. This was showing a very, very good understanding of this structure. That White entered this position from the start, that he knew that this bishop could potentially become a bad piece, and he simply understood that stopping White's c4 is probably impossible in the long term. So Black did everything he could, but he could not stop this pawn moving forward, thus making this bishop a monster. Pretty advanced, if you ask me, and that's why they're grandmasters. Alright, talking about bad pieces, I'm gonna show you another game. This is the game I played myself. I think I already did a stream about it. It doesn't matter. I just want to focus a bit on it more. And this is the game I played a couple of weeks ago in Finland. So after c4, you would think the natural response here for Black is queen d8, right? And after queen d8, let's say Black plays d takes on White plays d takes on c5, and let's say you play bishop c5, White takes on d8, you take with the king, knight c3, whatever, king e7, White is slightly better. So we go back to this position. Now black says, listen, why do I have to put the queen on d8? What about queen d7? And the idea is that if white takes on c5, bishop c5, queen d7, I can recapture the bishop. Meaning, I get something out of this trade. Not only I didn't move the king, I also brought the bishop in the game. Pretty deep, right? But of course, white is not obliged to do this. So white plays bishop e3, and now you're wondering, what is this bishop doing on c8? So the first thought probably in your mind is, well, listen, we probably gotta play b6 and bishop b7. We have to bring this bishop into life. Well, maybe, but I don't think that this bishop is a burning priority of this position. So of course we have to take on d4 first. Knight takes on d4. We play a short castle, knight c3, and now the best move here for black is queen c7, threatening rook d8. And after knight takes on c6, we take with the pawn. And again, it's like, oh my goodness, what is this, right? Because you're just ruining your pawn structure, and this bishop on c8 is bad. Well, if we think a bit further, we realize that this position actually gives black two options. Option number one, e5 is inevitable. And after e5, we bring the bishop to f5, or some scenarios g4, maybe e5, bishop e6, and look at this. Now this bad bishop suddenly is a very good piece. Or the second idea, we can play bishop b7 with the idea to play c5 and give the bishop long diagonal, and also a potential outpost on d4 for one of your pieces. Think about ideas like, I don't know, knight e7, knight e5, knight c6, knight e4. Yeah, a bit slow, but you get the point, right? What happened in the game? I didn't do this. I did not understand this. Although, of course, I know very well the concept of temporary bad pieces. I played rook d8, I took with the queen, and I played e5, which is too basic. Again, where's the problem with this idea? I keep my pawn structure healthy, I open the bishop, but the difference is with the queen on c7 and the pawn on c6, or the queen on c6 and the pawn standing on b7, I think the difference is pretty glaring. These two squares, which leads us to another very big topic in chess, the control of the squares. Right, and here white had a very large advantage after rook d1, bishop e6, rook d8. I can't take with the rook. The pawn on a7 is under attack. And after rook d1, after knight e5, white has a large advantage. Only because black was unwilling or didn't pay attention that he could go to a position with temporary bad piece so that it can spring to life a couple of moves later. It is pretty advanced. It is pretty advanced. Alright, let me show you more. Another example. There's going to be a lot of examples, don't worry. I think you're going to get the idea in the end. If some of you don't. Okay, let's say here, this is a position from a very topical line from the Carlsen. Again, another my game. Black just played knight f6. How can we misplay this position if we are going to play according to the standard rules? So you're thinking, okay, listen. I have to develop my pieces, right? This is what everybody is taught. You go to a chess club, you have a chess coach. Every single chess coach will tell you you have to develop your pieces. Why? Because this is how you bring them to life. Well, listen, but it's not so simple. So if you would play here bishop e2, is this not the so-called check move? You develop a piece, you are about to castle, but what if I would tell you, what is the bishop doing on e2? Nothing, except it allows you to castle short. And actually black's idea to position the queen on c7 is he might actually want to take on e4 at some point, play e5, and let's say play bishop c5. So what do you have here? The bishop should be standing on c4. And I mean, of course, there's nothing wrong with your position. You can play c3, you can play queen c2, but black is having no issues whatsoever. And all of this happened only because white was thinking very basic, in a basic way, how to continue our development. Okay, you might see actually knight f6, because this doubles the pawns. Let's say knight f6, e takes on f6, and let's say bishop e2 the same. We are continuing our development, and we are like convincing ourselves, this is a great position. I have doubled his pawns. This means I'm doing great, right? No, you're not doing great. Why is this? Because this gives up the e5 and g5 squares. It opens the bishop on the e6, and black will have a very nice control of the bishops and easy game against your king. Let's say you play something like a bishop d6, castles, whatever you do next, I don't know. Rook e1, black plays knight e7, you play, I don't know, another check move, bishop e3, black plays, let's say, f5. I prefer black. You know, I don't think that these double pawns really matter. Black is going to play knight f6, black is going to play knight g4, bishop e6, and it's a very easy game for him. And the fact that black has doubled these pawns, it means nothing. Actually, I do believe that the double pawns, the isolated pawns, unfortunately, they're one of the most overrated things at the club level. People tend to overestimate their importance. They're just pawns. I mean, don't give them too much credit than they should. Doubling pawns, isolated pawns, just check the material from the World Championship games, which you are gonna see. I'm gonna have some games from the match of Nepomniatchtchi against Dingler. For example, Dingler doesn't mind doubling the pawns. He also understands very well the principle, obviously. He's the challenger of the temporary bad pieces. And you're going to see what I'm talking about, again, from their perspective. So, how do we play out this position correctly then? There was already a suggestion from Abrakus in the chat. Queen e2. And again, you look at the queen e2 and you're like, what on earth is this? Why are you playing queen e2? This is ridiculous because we are blocking the bishop. The bishop should be standing on e2. Again, why are we doing this? We're fighting against the e5 threat. Meaning, black wants to play e5 and claim center. So we're playing queen e2 to stop that. But this bishop can join the game with g3, bishop g2. How about that? So here, black played knight e4, which I guess makes sense, right? Queen e4, knight e6, or knight e7, whatever. We play bishop d2 here. Queen e2 back. Our idea, we want to castle along. We want to play g3, bishop g2, and land the knight on e5. Black play bishop g4. Long castle. Again, looks pretty ridiculous, right? I mean, the bishop on f1 is terrible. This is a pin. But look how quickly the game can change. You play h3 and there's nothing black can do about this maneuver. Let's say black decides to keep the pin. You play g4. You play knight e5. You play f4. And you play bishop g2. And do you see where's the bad bishop now? Now the bad bishop here is actually one of the strongest pieces on the board. How come? How come this even happens, right? And you are probably wondering, probably black made a mistake. Yeah, you could say that. There was a mistake. So black should have traded on f3. So bishop h5 was definitely a mistake because g4, knight e5, f4 is a very powerful idea which is even known from the Scandinavian defense. So I guess black should take on f3, queen f3, black plays bishop d6. And guess what? We play d4, opening the bishop, and bishop c4. And now this bad bishop on f1 is suddenly a very good bishop. And we simply enter the realm of the two bishop advantage, which is another topic. So this game I analyzed in my YouTube channel. If you're interested, you can check it out. It essentially is everything about you need to know about the two bishops. But now you understand the reasoning why white did this. Why are we even entering the so-called temporary bad piece position? Because we have to stop knight e4 and e5. We can't allow to do this. And there's just no other way. So you play something like knight g3, e5, you play bishop e2, bishop c5, you're just worse, instantly. And that's why sometimes it's necessary. It's necessary to make these pieces temporarily bad, and then they just spring to life. All right. Okay, let's continue. And let's start with the next game. Another bishop example. Do I still give private lessons? I'm very busy. Yeah, I do give, but some. I don't actually accept any more students. So very, very busy. Okay, listen. Now let's check this position. So black just played knight h5. Now the question is, what are you going to do? So black says, listen, I want to take on a4. I want to get two bishop advantage. And after I'm going to take on a4, I want to open the position and increase the power of my two bishops. Makes perfect sense, if you ask me. All right, you probably think, listen, I don't want to give up the bishop for free. And this is something I do believe myself. Never give up bishops for no good reason against the knight. There should be like a very, very good reason. So we are not going to do that, because I do believe that in open positions, in the long term, the bishops will be the stronger piece. So if we want to keep it, where do we keep it? How to understand if your piece is temporarily bad or just bad? That is the trickiest question, I guess, you can do. Let's put it this way. If the position is mobile, if the position is not locked, this means that there is a fair chance that your bad temporarily bad piece in the longer term will become a good piece. But if the position is locked, meaning there is a chain of pawns in front, or the opponent has managed to block your temporarily bad piece with his minor pieces, and there's no way to budge them, well, then you are in trouble. Of course, it's not always so simple. So yeah, here Linux player is saying, what about bishop g5 with the idea to provoke some weaknesses? For example, I could play h6, and after bishop e7, rook e8, I think you're allowing black to activate the rook. But Lemmings player's idea was to provoke h6 and play bishop c1. Right. What about bishop c1? So, again, it's pretty important for us to understand if we are going to play bishop c1 or any other follow-up, what is going to be the next plan we are going to be doing here. And I do, once again, believe you should be always thinking about your pawn play. Because the golden strategy is you push forward your pawns and pieces go behind. Really simple, right? So if you're looking at this position, you're thinking, where's going to be my pawn play? Very important. You realize it's going to be c4, knight c3. But you know, I don't really like positioning the bishop on c1 because it's the starting square. So I'm thinking, why can't I immediately put it on e3? It looks strange, right? Because the bishop on e3 is blocking the pawn. It's not doing anything. It's staring at the pawn. But at the same time, we're showing some deeper understanding, because our idea is what? We want to play c4, we want to play knight c3, apply some pressure. And this bishop on e3, it sometimes extra defends the pawn on d4. It doesn't close the c file for the rook. It also, just in case, fights for the longer diagonal. For example, if black would at some point consider to play c5, you could take it, and after knight c5, this bishop is in the game, which is more than it was doing on c1. So on e3, the bishop itself is not doing much. It really depends what we are going to do next. And then we pay attention to the opponent. What is the knight doing on h5? Nothing. So don't worry about your bishop on e3. Black also has issues with this knight. Look at how the game continued. He played rook b8, c4. He went d-dex on c4, which is, you know, debatable, but knight c3 threat, sometimes knight e5, proved to be a very difficult task for black to handle. He took here. He played bishop h3 here. And now it's time to take the center. There you go. The rest doesn't matter. So we positioned the bishop on e3 temporarily because we realized it's standing better on c1. Some things changed. When I managed to play c4, knight c3, we managed to win the control of the center, and then we just removed the bishop and played e4. And now this bishop is one of the strongest pieces on the board. And then we can position it back on e3, again play at some point maybe d5, and once the very bad, temporarily bad piece becomes one of the strongest pieces on the board. Alright. Now, since I already promised to you, I'm going to talk about the World Championship match. Let me bring you up this game. Do you recognize this game? This is Jan Nepomniatchtchi against Ding Liren. Whichever game it was. This was the game where Ding Liren played the French defense. You remember? So this was the game where Ding Liren collapsed. Yeah, where he had the time trouble, he was pressing and he had the freeze or whatever. People were like, oh my goodness, what's he doing? So let's have a look at this position. Now, very typical problem for the French defense is the black's bad bishop on c8, which is temporarily a bad piece. So it makes sense for black at some point to activate it. And again, look how quickly black can get in trouble if he is playing the position to the standard. For example, let's say black plays here. Yeah, knight c6 was played in the game. Let's say black plays castles and b6. It's such a logical move, right? You play b6, you want to put the bishop on b7 and give the bishop new life on the long diagonal. This didn't happen in the game, and for a very good reason. Because after queen e2, after rook d1, suddenly there's a very dangerous x-ray for the queen. So queen c7 jumps under knight b5 ideas, looks quite unpleasant. Maybe queen c8, and knight f5 is a problem. And now you start to realize, listen, something is wrong. My knight on d5 doesn't have enough support. And there's a lot of tactical ideas you should be afraid of. I mean, takes, and white has already a better pawn structure, bishop f4, rook d1, and black is in a lot of trouble. So all of this happened because black was not feeling the nuances of this position, and he cared too much about immediate bringing to the life the bishop on c8. So this is where Ding Liren showed why he's one of the best players in the world. He played knight c6. First, he shattered his pawn structure, and he made his bishop look bad. But what is more important, now this knight on d5 is better supported. So after castles, queen e2, bishop b7. Look at this. Again, bishop on b7 is such a bad piece, right? Because it's staring at a pawn, it's doing nothing. But Ding Liren is thinking deeper. He's thinking that he is going to play c5 at some point later, and if he does it, this bishop is going to be a monster. And there's nothing white can do about it, because theoretically, how Nepomniatchtchi could try to stop it is somehow land the pawn on c5. Or somehow he has to land the knight on c5, or the bishop on c5 and back it up with the knight. How on earth are you going to do that? That's why, once again, it's important to understand this concept. Yes, our bishop on b7 is temporarily bad, but in a couple of moves, it's going to be a really great piece. And this is how the game continued after queen c7, queen e4. Here, I don't understand why Ding Liren played knight f6. This move makes no sense. must be the nerves or something, and this gave Nepomniatchtchi a pretty good attack. So what he could have done, he could have played the simple g6, defending from the mate, and just play c5. Because I do believe that the pieces best stand in the center, and if your knight is standing on d5, there should be like a very good reason why you would want to remove this knight from the center, right? This is how I do believe. But there was a greater, deeper idea for Ding, and he did more or less the same. He did the same, he played c5, he opened his bishop, but now the knight on f6 is a bit passive. Thank you for the sub, FB3, appreciate that. Alright, the rest of the game doesn't matter. Again, I wanted to show you this example, and the last example about the bishops will be this game of two chess greats. Magnus Carlsen against Maxime Vachier. Maxime Vachier, the French number 2. Many years French number 1, legendary chess player, one of the strongest players in the world. Magnus Carlsen, the former world champion. Not yet, he's still world champion, but he's about to become a former world champion after the match. And no, I'm pretty sure that Ding understood. His structure is just, I don't know why he played knight f6 in the previous game. And now in this position, now this is a pretty rare line. Well, I do believe it's a very topical line because this is something I analyzed myself quite a bit. So, black has two bishops, white has the queen on d4. And now that you're looking at this position, you're probably wondering, how do I defend from the attack on the rook on h8? The first choice is check. We want to continue our development. We want to play knight f6. And then we want to play bishop g7, we want to play a short castle, we play d6, d5, whatever. Yeah, right. So I'm going to play e5, knight e5, and actually e6 is not so good, because black plays f6, and white just gave up the center. Look at this, by the way, temporarily bad piece. e5, queen goes God knows where, I don't know, e4, maybe bishop g7, another temporarily bad piece. Castles. Let me just show to you how quickly things can go wrong for white. One monster, and the second monster joins the game. Look at these monster bishops. But of course, a white is not obliged to play e6. White plays castles, bishop g7, white plays queen h4, bishop h6, and this is a very good position for white. I played it myself in career, I can testify. I can affirm this is very good for white. So, what Magnus does, it's unbelievable. Imagine this. So maybe we could actually check it from the black's perspective. Black plays unbelievable f6. And everybody's like, why? What's he doing? Doesn't he even know how to develop his pieces? Doesn't he know that f6 is a bad piece? Well, Magnus knows better, right? So why is he doing this? He keeps the two bishops. This is very important. And then he says, listen, I know my bishop on g7 is going to be a very bad piece. I know that. But it's not permanently locked. And then the pieces are going to jump to life. And my two bishops, which you can't trade yourself, they're going to become monsters. So this is Magnus's strategy. Is there a risk that this bishop on f8 in the long term is going to be a very bad piece? Yeah, absolutely. So if he misplays it, or he wrongly evaluates at some point, definitely Magnus risks here that the dark swept bishop will be shut out from the game completely. So the game continues with d6. He secures against any pawn play. Do you hear what I'm saying? The key word? Pawn play. c5, making sure white has no breaks. e5, c5. We fix those plans. Now the bishop goes on g7, again staring at the pawn, which is, you know, pretty terrible bishop. And here, this is where MVL started to go wrong. And when I was doing analysis of this line back in the day for modern chess, because I do believe that I released my database for modern chess about Sicilian Rossolimo, because this is Sicilian Rossolimo, I was recommending the idea of knight c3, knight f4, and f4, f5. Trying to combat black's eventual f5 idea at some point in the future. MVL, I don't know, either he didn't know this or he had different ideas. He played b3, he played knight c3, he played bishop d2, and already here you start to see there's a very good feeling that white's, my apologies, the black's idea f5 is inevitable. So here MVL tried to somehow stop it. So his idea was, okay, listen, you are gonna play f5, fine, I accept that, you're gonna activate your bishop, but I'm gonna bother your king. I'm gonna play h5, I'm gonna play knight h4, I'm gonna get to those pawns, and you can have your active bishop, I don't care, but I have a strong attack. Reasonable, right? I mean, this is perfectly logical approach from MVL, although chess.com evaluation says this is a weird plan. But Magnus is thinking even deeper than MVL. Magnus said no. Magnus played rook b7. What is the rook b7 idea? Again, weird move. I guess he wants to put the rook on e7 and then toy with the ideas to play either f5 or d5. MVL charge forward. And this is where Magnus plays g5. And this is nuts. I mean, look at this. This is completely nuts. So Magnus is positioning all of his pawns on the color of his bishop. Are you like, what on earth is he doing? Is it now becoming a permanently bad piece? Well, no. First, he's securing himself against any attack that White was thinking. White was thinking about h5, knight h4 ideas. So Black says, first I'm gonna secure, there's nothing happening here. But most importantly, Magnus makes sure that MVL cannot block these squares. He can't block it, because if MVL was able to jump to f5, Magnus can resign. Because this bishop on g7 is going to be a very bad piece. Imagine yourself, White is able to play g4, f5. Sure, then we can talk about permanently bad piece on g7. Do you see the difference? And again, Magnus thinks that in the long term, this bishop on g7 is still gonna jump to life, because f5, listen buddy, you can't stop it. Is this risky? Sure. Yeah, you can misplay it. So again, you have to take a lot of consideration. You have to do the calculation for your opponent. You have to understand if the opponent will be unable to block your temporary bad pieces, making them permanently bad. So what happened is that MVL decided to go all in. He decided to go for a counterattack. King h8, another great move. MVL felt that he needs to counter-strike at the king side, and this is where Magnus's pieces started to jump to life. Rook g8, knight c6, removing the knight, and ba-bam, that's it. f5, and from here, Magnus completely dominated the game. That's it. MVL was done. Because this bishop opens with such a powerful force, MVL tried to start his kingside attack, there was nothing he could do, and now this bishop essentially becomes one of the strongest pieces on the board, which was a very bad piece a couple of moves ago. And the game continued very dynamically. You take bishop takes on c3, e5, and here Maxime tried to complicate matters. He tried to sacrifice a piece, but in the end, Magnus was winning. He won the game. A beautiful game. Again, understanding greatly the concept of the temporarily bad pieces. Why the rook on b7? I think that Magnus was not anticipating that h5 will always happen. And he was thinking about ideas like e6. He was thinking about ideas of rook e7 and f5. I think so. So he was thinking that this rook on the 7th rank, sometimes it's going to be a useful addition. Think about Ding Laurent's rook a2 against Nepomniatchtchi. And this game I'm going to show to you, because this is again a topic about temporarily bad pieces. Alright, let me continue. Now, let's move on to the knight. So let me start with some basic examples. Really basic, nothing really difficult. This position. So black has healthy position. There's nothing wrong with his position. And if you notice, there's something odd about the structure is that white has some problems with the square on d4, right? I mean, we have very nice control. In the meantime, white is not controlling the d5 square because we have the pawn on c6 for that. So we could land a minor piece on d5 and try to cement on it. Yes, exactly. And this is what leads to 98. And 98 is temporarily a bad piece. Because, I mean, okay, sure, this is pretty standard, right? Because we are retreating to the last rank. We are imprisoning the rook on f8. But at the same time, there's nothing white can do to stop the maneuver knight g7 and knight e6. So with the knight on e8, probably there will be some sort of idea to play f4, but you just take it f4. Rook f7 and king's in defense. Mar del Plata is a common lift. You're talking about Kaleidoscope guy, about the previous game. Yeah, this rook b7, I'm going to show you also the game of Dingle Ren. You're going to see it's a very common maneuver, at least at the high level. And the game continued after 98. White was doing the same. Knight g7, knight e6. You see that in the end, white is struggling because of this weakness. Black was able to win the game. So this is really basic, but again, it should give you like a good understanding that even though the knight at f6 is standing good, it's doing nothing bad. The focus of this position is this square on d4, because the knight at f6 is, what's it doing there? It's doing nothing. So we need to give it a new role. Hello, Didier. Another example. If the knight on h4 wouldn't hang after f4, would black be in trouble after f4? Well, I wouldn't really say black would be in trouble, but you would have to pay attention to the move. No, I don't think that's like an immediate trouble, but sure, you have to check the maneuver. Hello, Jim Slover. All right, another game, and this is a very common position from the very topical line of the Carlsen. Actually, this position will be in my course, King's Indian Attack for Chessable, my third course, which is finished. I'm just waiting for the release date. I don't know when it's gonna be, probably some May, maybe middle of the May, I don't really know yet. And this idea is also mentioned in the course because I'm gonna enter it also in some positions from the Carlsen. So, black wants to take on f3. We play knight e2. And now the question is again, why are we doing this? The bishop on c1 is a bad piece. Why are we playing knight f3, knight e2? Actually, the idea is really simple. We want to recapture on f3 with the knight, should this happen. And that's why, for example, bishop e2 probably is also a fine move. But then again, black will play knight f6. Let's say h3, I think it's simply tactically impossible. Knight e4, knight f2, knight h1. This knight escapes. In the end, you have some issues to protect the pawn on e4. Bishop f3, no, I'm not really sure if that's a real threat, but he ruins your pawn structure. So we play knight e2, we protect it. And we don't worry about the bishop on c1, because we realize in the long term, this bishop is gonna come to life. But this is not about the bishop, check this out. We secure the king, go away from the pin. And now the key move. Knight e1. So why this move is so good? After knight e1, white says, listen, I really prefer my knight over your bishop. Not knight g1, knight e1. I want to play f3 I want to solidify my control of the center, and this knight is going to join the game to d3. Even more, white says, your bishop on g4 is useless. I don't think it's going to be a good piece. Okay, for example, let's say black plays e5. Makes sense. He is controlling the center, right? I want to play f3. Or maybe actually, let's say I'm going to play bishop c4. Yeah, I'm going to start with this move. Bishop c4, let's say knight f6, up f3. Where do you go? You play bishop e6. I'm going to simply ruin your pawn structure. Now look at this. Suddenly, all of white's pieces jump to life. This bishop on c1 is not a bad piece, and black is left with a weakness on e5. So, yeah, g6 maybe is not really the best move, but I think it very nicely showcases the ideas. So black played knight b6, a4, trying to push it away, a5, knight c4, trade. Do you mean it's better to play with the knights at the beginning? No, that's not what I mean. I mean is that we are thinking a bit deeper. The entire purpose of this bootcamp, I want to a bit expand your mind so that you're not thinking about if this piece, most commonly, it's either a knight or a bishop. If it's temporarily badly positioned, this is something you automatically disregard. So the purpose of this bootcamp is slightly expand your thought process, that you're thinking a bit deeper, that you're thinking that in the long term, in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 moves, in the end, this piece will be a really good piece, because I do see it might be becoming a really powerful piece a couple of moves later. That's the way of thinking. So in the end, a bigger toolbox, whatever. In the end, you see this bishop. Where do you go? Where do you go with this bishop? So black said, listen, I have no good squares for this bishop. I said, okay, I'm going to play bishop d7, knight d3, b5. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's some knight c5 problems attacking these pawn on b7. Yeah, bishop c8, you just go back to the starting square. He played b5, he played castle, and after knight c5, rook d1, black would resign. How come? Again, what exactly did black did wrong? Can you understand? Okay, let's take it back once again from the start. Where was black's mistake? So bishop g4, this is a theoretical move. Knight e2, we are making temporarily bad piece on c1. Okay, g6, is that a mistake? Hard to believe. c3 here, king c2, knight e7, all normal looking moves, right? Knight e1. So the point is, white correctly identifies that the bishop on g4 is not actually such a good piece, because it has no good squares to go. It is limited by his own pawns. It cannot go to h5. So after knight b6, a4, a5, knight c4, white ensures that this bishop cannot retreat to e6. And a couple of moves later, bishop e6 ruins his pawn structure, bishop c8 just goes back to the starting square, and bishop d7 is just bad. And this is what got black in trouble. Maybe b4 instead of knight b6? What do you mean? So where did black go wrong? I think it's several inaccuracies. I think g6 is not the best move. Maybe here he had to take on f3. Well, then we enter the debate of the two bishop advantage. Again, check my bootcamp about two bishops. I do believe this is simply a great opening for white. So we are entering again after the opening. According to modern chess engines, they give here solid advantage for white. So if black makes one inaccuracy right here, maybe this is the second inaccuracy at some point, and this leads to a terrible position, because you mount together one inaccuracy after another. They're not very obvious mistakes, but in the end they culminate in a very terrible position. Okay, sure, maybe b5 was not a good move, right? But how do you stop, for example, short castle knight c5? How do you stop this position? Because the pawn is under attack, you play b6, guess what? We have two bishops again. Bishop e3, we play rook d1, these are easy targets. Black has no counterplay. And again, we notice the power of this pawn structure. We notice the power of this early move knight e1. And it's so easy to misplay this. Again, imagine you're having this position. How easy you can misplay this by playing standard developing moves. So you see, you have a pin. Are you playing, okay, I'm going to play bishop e2. Let's say your opponent plays knight f6. You're like, okay, my pawn on e4 is under attack. I have to defend it. You play e5. And you convince yourself this is good because you are defending the pawn with a tempo. So black plays something like knight e5. Then you're bothered with his bishop. Here, I don't know what you do here. You play something like bishop d2, e6, knight c3. Let's say knight e7, and you're worse. That's it, you're just worse. By playing normal developing moves, you can easily get the worst position in this opening. Alright. Let's move on. Another basic example. This is not going to be really difficult. Why knight e1 was important? You mean here? If you play knight c4, well, I'm going to take on f3. It's not a big deal. Sure, you ruin your pawn structure for no good reason. I think it's actually a bit deeper than this. We realize that this bishop on g4 is useless. It's useless. It's not doing anything. And I do believe that in the long term, this knight on d3 is going to be a much better piece than this bishop on g4. That's the reason why we're not doing this, why we're not playing knight c4, because this trade, I think that black actually gets slightly more than he should. Because we do get our two bishop advantage, but we have a slightly worse pawn structure. Headache, yeah? I hope it's not very difficult because I'm trying to explain it in a very simple language. Listen, if this is very difficult, I have difficulties then to explain it because I'm trying to explain it as simple as I can. All right, here we go. Now this is going to be pretty easy. This is easy. So white is to move. And we're thinking from a simple perspective, which piece doesn't stand great in this position? Now that we look at this position more closely, we realize it's the knight on c3. Yeah, that's why it's knight e1. It's not very difficult. Again, knight e1 may make it temporarily bad, right? After knight e1, what's it doing on the first rank? It's just going to e3. It's going to c4. And this is what happened in the game. Knight goes to e3, and white starts a kingside attack. Easy, no? It's not easy. I don't know. Okay, maybe for me it's easy. But you just ask yourself sometimes what your piece is doing on that square. The knight on c3, it was a good square right after the opening. Now, look at this. No, 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 no. So what's it doing there? I like my bishops because they have a very nice potential to control these long diagonals. I can't probably play e5 because it's simply under attack. I don't want to play f5 because it gives up the e5 square. So I guess I want to start by improving my pieces. So that's why we land the knight on e3. For intermediate players, you believe it's just counterintuitive to let that bishop on g7 to give full access to the diagonal. This is actually brilliant remark. Thank you, Express Trains, for this. I don't know how to properly address this. Sphinxy correctly says there is nothing on this diagonal, but maybe I could make another bootcamp about temporarily good pieces. What about that? I mean, temporarily good pieces. Because this bishop on g7, it's a nice bishop. There's no denying. But what's it doing there? I mean, it is definitely controlling a very nice diagonal, but I think it's just essentially shooting sparrows with a cannon, no? I mean, what's it doing? Very, very nice diagonal, right? It doesn't matter. And this is where actually we enter another topic. We realize that most of the Black's army is having a party at the queen side. So White says, listen, my knight c4 is going to wait for a moment. And since I have such a large presence of the pieces at the king side, how about I bother the king? How about that? Right, I want to play h5, I want to play f5, I want to expose the king completely, because this is just one defender. You can strike whatever you want on this long distance, since every single army of the opponent is... I don't know what they're doing here, right? So he's expecting me to play knight c4 now, but I'm gonna delay it because the knight on e3 stands pretty well anyway. And the game actually finished like this. And White started the killing a kingside attack. So the rest doesn't matter. So Black got the beautiful knight on d4. He has a beautiful bishop on g7, but there's a direct attack. I can show you how the game finished. Actually, it was pretty nice. Just adding more pieces to the attack. Checkmate. So there's a mate on the board. King f8, rook g8. In the end, the attack was killing. There's nothing Black could do. Knight e1, bishop c3 is one of the big ideas that should be resisted. Actually, express trains. If we go back to this position, I feel I have to mention. I was doing a bootcamp about the Marozzi bind. And in the Marozzi bind, one of the common ideas is to ignore the bishop on g7. Although the reasoning is a bit different, we just ignore it. Just a second, where's my music? Okay. The attack comes slowly. Yes, yes. But again, it's again slightly different topic. Now, since we're talking about temporarily bad pieces, let me show you another one. This is going to be pretty basic. Again, not really difficult. So I try to give you also some simpler examples so that not everything is so mind-boggling, but at least you will understand the reasoning a bit better. For example, you see people like Magnus Carlsen or Dingler Ren or Jan Nepomniatchtchi, they're locking their pieces away. And you don't understand why, now you'll understand it, right? Is that he's thinking that in the long run, his bad piece will be the good piece. Can they be wrong? Absolutely. So here, this is my game against Kasper Pieroń, one of the leading Polish grandmasters. I played it last year. So knight e1. Yeah, knight e1 is a very common move. Because White says... the king's safety is far more important here. And the point is, after castles knight c4, White is toying with the ideas at some point to bring this knight in the game. Bishop d2, knight c3, takes, and we get a normal position. But there's something I wanted to show a bit deeper. No, there's more. There's more about this. There's more about this. Now look at this position. So Black plays bishop c6. And you're thinking, listen, it's an equal trade. Why don't I trade the bishops? So you could probably think, okay, listen, let me just play maybe here. I'm going to play rook c8. You are going to play whatever, I don't know, let's say a3. I don't know, maybe there's a better move. We are going to trade. We are going to trade, then we are going to even more trades, and then we shake happily hands. Because we did everything we were supposed to, right? We traded every single bad piece through the open C file. Right? Wrong. We go back to this position. So what are we supposed to do? Well, again, we are entering the realm of the two bishop advantage. e4. How about that? Sure, why not? And after e4, white is deliberately locking his bishop away. But there's more. We're fighting for space advantage. I hope you're seeing this. So we are taking care of these two squares. Black plays rook d8. Black plays rook d3. Black plays rook d8. So there's a very, very nice control of this d file. Here. And f3. So there you go. This bishop suddenly comes to life. And white is able to preserve the so-called bishop power. The penetration of the d file means nothing, because the bishop doesn't hold there. And in the end, white is pushing. So I was playing this game with the black color. I made a pretty much effortlessly a draw with the black color because I understood the dangers. I understood where to position my pieces. But this type of strategy, this is very popular. Again, at the highest level, especially grandmasters, they understand the power of two bishops. Again, if you're interested, head out to my YouTube channel, check out one of my older bootcamps about two bishops, its powers, and how to utilize them. There's many, many nice examples. So we are not going to talk about it here, but this is about making temporarily bad pieces, and white imprisons his own bishop on g2 when he could have simply make an equal trade. Because we're thinking deeper. We're thinking deeper that our bishops will be really powerful force like 10, 20 moves later. Alright? Yes, I'm a professional chess player. Over 2600. Another example. This game, I was playing with black like a month ago against Ariantari. Ariantari is the guy you probably might know. I mean, maybe he didn't address himself. He was one of the guys who was chilling in the background of Magnus in the Bottas live stream. You remember, right? Magnus was doing his fun stuff. He was streaming Title Tuesday wearing sunglasses, and there were girls also in the sunglasses chilling in the background. And there was also Arian. Maybe you didn't notice him. Arian is Norwegian number 2, 2660 level player, also a frequent player of Norway Chess Super Tournament. Very nice guy, bright talent. And now look at this move. So Arian was playing this against me a month ago in the Swedish team championship. Can you imagine the next move that Norwegian number 2, world top 100 player, he played here? If you know what I'm talking about in this bootcamp about temporarily bad pieces. F3, that's basic. F3 is really basic because, again, you want to open the bishop, you want to fight for the center, but it's not going to be so simple. It's advanced, but it's basic. You remember this game, right? Think deep. d4 is a fine move. There's nothing wrong with this move. You're going to play d4, I'm going to take en passant. You're going to play queen takes on d3, I'm going to play a short castle. It's fine. I'm going to play queen h5, bishop h3, trade the bishops, have a good position, no issues. There's nothing wrong with e4. f4. f4 is more or less the same as f3. I'm simply going to take it, and after bishop f3, you can take your center. I'm going to have a counterplay against it. Not really so obvious if white is keeping the center or not. Remember, we're talking about temporarily bad knights. Knight e3. Actually, knight e3 is a very common move. This was the main move for a long time. You might remember a game of Anish Giri against Alexander Grishuk. Not the previous FIDE candidate cycle, but the cycle before. There was this very exciting game where Grishuk played h5. Yes, 91. 91. Uh-huh. But do you understand why? Why on earth is white doing this? Do you understand the reasoning why white is positioning the knight on e1? It's just you want to slap somebody who plays this move, right? Not d3. d4. d4. So you play should castle. I guess you have to do this. And after d4, the pawn on e4 is slightly in trouble. Queen f5, queen e6 looks unnatural. So you take it, and knight e3 comes with the tempo. So instead of this automatic knight e3, which was played by Giri, here Aryan had a new idea that after knight e1, d4, knight e3, he makes his knight a temporarily bad piece, but now it's one of the best pieces. What is wrong with d3? I have no idea. Yeah, maybe bishop 5. Maybe bishop 5. I don't really know Jim Solver. Yeah, but d4 is more straightforward. And after d4, knight e3, e4, he got a nice edge. Like he won the game because I was playing very badly. But anyway, he played a nice game. All right. Another example. This game was played by Lev Pologoyevsky, Soviet chess legend. Black just played knight b4, attacking the pawn on c2. And now the question is, how are you guys going to defend this pawn? I think you already know the answer, right? Should be pretty obvious. But first, I feel I have to mention knight b1. No, knight b1 is a bit too much. Knight b1 drops the pawn on e4. I mean, there's like too many attacking pieces against the pawn on e4. This is too much. I mean, the problem with rook c1 is knight a2. That's the problem. It's repetition. Unfortunately, it repeats. Queen d1. Queen d1 drops the pawn on e4. We can't do this. Otherwise, it would be interesting. Yes, knight e1. And imagine yourself knight e1. And now this looks really serious. Because if you play knight e1, and I would ask yourself how you are going to bring your pieces into life from the queen side. I mean, they're already joining the game. The rook on a1 is able to join the game with rook d1. And we just want to storm at the king side. For example, this is how the game continued. f4, and white's idea is very simple. f4, e5, g4, f5, king h1, rook g1, knight f3. This pawn doesn't matter. And when you start to look more closely at this position, you ask yourself, you probably already have heard this. Where is black's pawn play? Remember this term, the pawn play. Where is it? So what do? Do you play b5? Then what? What are you doing here? Because this pawn is protected by the rook. Even b takes, so what? I'm just going to start the king side attack. So what do you do with black? Do you play c5, c4? It's impossible. I have too many defenders there. e5 is going to be well defended. f5 and close your bishop. Right? It's not really so simple. And black play bishop f6, black play bishop e7, and Pologoyevsky just started this king side attack. And of course, here his opponent, William Addison, he blinked. He felt, okay, this attack is pretty dangerous. I have to meet it. And in the end, look at this. Pologoyevsky managed to establish a very nice outpost on e5. And this temporarily bad piece on e1, it doesn't matter. Because after a couple of moves, it was back. So white just made this temporarily bad piece on e1. He secured himself against the repetition at the queen side, and he just started king side attack, which prompted black to do the counterplay with f6. Is it bad to play bishop f6, e5, d4, knight e3? What do you mean? Ah, you mean here? Bishop f6, it's maybe not a bad move. Let's say e5 here, but it's definitely bad to play d4. Why? Because it opens this bishop, and also it gives your opponent some counterplay. Because the philosophy, I think it's also very important to understand the philosophy, the core idea of any opening, any system that you play. The philosophy of this system, and this is actually something I took from my King's Indian Attack course, this position. The philosophy of this system is to lock the queen side. Your business is nothing at a queen side. You want to keep it locked as much as you can. The same applies for the center. You have a pawn majority, you have a lot of pawns at once at the king side. You have a lot of pieces looking at the black king. This is where white should be facing his gameplay. Go at the black king. And this is what Polugieevsky was doing. He did it 50 years ago. So e5, g4, king h1, everything goes at the black king. So if you would check the engines, what engines are saying here, engines say, listen buddy, play b5, gg, yeah, just bother this pawn on a4. But is this how people play? It just looks ridiculous. This is not how people play, because most of the players are generally scared about their king's safety. So even his opponent, William Addison, back in the 70s, he was also concerned about the king, and that's why, of course, he did play f6, which created this potential weakness on e5. And this is when Polugieevsky said, okay, listen, I got what I wanted. I got the outpost on e5, now the knight goes back. I have a couple of more examples. This is pretty simple. Maybe let's check it from the black's perspective, although I was playing it with white, and I won a very nice game against Latvian chess legend Edvin Cengiz. Edvin Cengiz, he used to be #1 Latvian chess player. He was in the top 100 about 25-30 years ago. Now he's well received chess coach. And here, Edvins was understood the problems he has here. Hello, let me explain, take care. So white says, listen, I want to trade some pieces so that I am making your pieces on g6 and g7 pretty useless. And at the same time, I'm going to take care of your weaknesses at the queen side. So this is where Cengiz says, listen, I'm going to put my knight on h7, which is a ridiculous move. But the idea is it's not going to stay there forever. So the point is, black plays h5, black plays g4, and now you see once this temporarily bad piece on h7 suddenly threatening to become a really strong piece. At the same time, yeah, see you later, Schlendy and Lemix player, thank you for watching this. And now suddenly you see that this knight g5 is a very serious threat. So you start to appreciate the power of this idea like knight h7. So it's not only out of spite, black declines the trade. He's thinking a bit deeper. He says, yes, my knight on h7 is a bad piece, but after h5, g4, and knight g5, it has a nice potential to become a really strong piece. So it was a nice idea. But the problem is, white has a very powerful response, h4. White says, your idea is not going to work. Why? Because after g takes on h3, there's going to be queen takes on h5, this pawn drops, and your minor pieces are not doing anything. The rest doesn't matter. I just wanted to show this idea that sometimes you can retreat, you can think a couple of moves deeper, and then you realize that after h5, g4, knight g5, your knight will be becoming a stronger piece than this knight. Otherwise, just trade. Just trade, and you're walking past this opportunity. There was actually a very cool example from a certain game in the Swedish league. Let me show it to you from the white's perspective. Black just played bishop b4. Look at this. Black played bishop b4, and his idea was that white was threatening to play b4, so this bishop was standing on the fate. Black said bishop b4, and his idea was to stop b4, b5, and white is very active at the queen side, and is opening this bishop on the long diagonal. Thank you, Rishika. Now the question is, what white can do about this, taking into account what we know about temporary bad pieces. Do you have any ideas? 91, yeah? Wait, I didn't say it's got to be specifically 91 or 91. Yes, knight a2. But again, listen. Knight a2 looks really scary. It is really scary because, again, I'm seeing these pieces at the queen side. No, it's knight a2. It's the correct answer. And the idea is to push away the bishop so that we can play b4. And then eventually after b4, b5, this bishop on g2 is going to be becoming a monster because it's staring at these pawns on b6 and c7. Yes, so there's definitely bishop c5. Absolutely. This is what happened in the game. I also want to mention bishop takes on a2 is a possibility, but it gives away the control of many light squares in the position. So even though black achieves what he wanted, he did stop b4, but this brings the question, wasn't the price too high? Yes, wasn't the price too high, because this essentially hands over on the platter all the light squares of the position, right? So white can just play again with the two bishops. Again, we are entering the same discussion. Two bishop advantage, how to carry it out. You mean c5, not b5? C5? Yeah, I guess queen e4. Now this bishop is a monster, you see? It is controlling this long diagonal. I just want to take on b4. Again, get two bishops. And the pawn on b7 is a target. Bishop e5 also is a threat. So c5 unfortunately doesn't achieve anything. And the game continues with bishop c5. Bishop d5. And here a simple queen c2 would secure white a solid advantage. Because b4 is inevitable. Let's say black plays bishop d6. b4 here. Knight c3. And white's pieces jump to life. Right? So thinking like this sometimes is very, very important. And if I would be playing this from the white's perspective, I would definitely realize this is an odd move. It's a weird move. I mean, I'm imprisoning my knight on a2, my rook on a1 and b1, they're not doing anything. But again, I'm thinking deeper. I have to take into consideration every single response from my opponent and make sure that the knight on a2, the rooks on a1 and b1, they don't remain there for the remaining of the game, and b4 indeed happens. Or, if black gives away the bishop on a2 and gives away all the light squares, then I simply change my plan. I guess I play b3, rook c2, and again I employ the power of two bishops. There was another more complex example. Not many, some. I took some, like two examples from the King's Indian attack. One line and one game. Engine supports all of these ideas. Every single position I'm showing to you, it's vetted and confirmed by the engine. Sometimes engine even gives us ideas, extra ideas we can think about, right? So again, hope that you'll expand your mind and think a bit deeper. So here, the knight on a3 is a bad piece. Actually, in this line, it is pretty difficult for white to figure out where to put the knight. So we landed on e3 because I do believe that most of the pieces which are close to the center, they're influencing things. And although this knight on e3 doesn't appear to be doing much, because it has no future, not at least immediately, and it's blocking the bishop, it's pretty important we are thinking about ways to exploit the the current piece placement. And here in particular, again, a very powerful idea for white was not immediately focusing on solving the issue of the temporary bad piece of the knight on e3 and the bishop on c1, but focus on other things. So since black is threatening to play h4, for example, short castle, h4, bishop d6, and start the Kingston attack, we make sure that the black king cannot castle the long way. We make sure we establish ourselves a pretty serious counterplay in the center. And by this trade, not only we open the bishop, not only we improve the knight, but we are about to strike in the center with well-timed queen c2, bishop f4, e4. And now suddenly look at this. The bishop on f4 has jumped to the life. The knight on g2 is not doing much, but again, we might follow a rule. Don't touch the pieces which you don't know where should they stand, and instead develop those you are sure. What about king f1 after bishop e4? Why would you want to do that? Because this is a pretty powerful bishop. And king f1, meaning you want to take on g2 with the king. But I want to castle long. And actually this is how the game continues. Look at this. So knight e5. First we made sure that king cannot castle the long way. And short castle is dangerous because h5 is committed. And now we play bishop f4, e4, and long castle. Why didn't black take knight e5? Maybe he should have. Yeah, maybe he should have. But it's not only about the double pawns. It's more than that. Because after knight e5, d takes on e5, there's suddenly queen a4 check. How do you defend this pawn, by the way? White can take it. Okay, you might stop it. You might stop it with something like c6. And I could play maybe... What about... I can improve this knight, actually. What about knight h4? Knight e7, bishop g5. What about the long castle? What about e4? You know, the major difference here is that white can castle, black cannot. And with the queens on the board, I think this is pretty dangerous. So maybe black actually could try to trade queens. Something like queen b6, try to talk white out of the trade. I would probably say no. And proceed with e4, a long castle, f4 maybe. And black is going to regret having included this h5. Actually, this game is analyzed in my YouTube channel. Most of the games that I am showing you, which are mine, I have covered on my YouTube channel. I just took some of the moments which are covering the temporarily bad pieces. Right, and that's it. That's it. I'm not really going through the entire game. It doesn't really matter at this point. But again, hope you understand it. Okay, and now finally, one of the last examples is the very famous game. Now you should know which game I'm showing to you. Do you recognize this? Yeah. Ding Liren, Jan Nepomniatchtchi, the World Championship match is going on right now. And again, you look at this position, and you might ask yourself, why on earth is Ding doing this? Doesn't he know how to develop the pieces? I mean, the knight should be going on f3. The bishop should be going on d3. There should be a short castle. And there should be, I don't know, let's say rook e1, right? So all of this makes like perfect sense from a standard point of view. So why on earth is Ding doing this? Why is he putting, first, why is he spending the tempo on an a3? Why is he playing knight e2? Now look at this. It looks so ugly. The bishop on c1 is a very bad piece, at least temporarily. The knight on e2, it's blocking the bishop's view, but it's all about the structure. So Ding Laurent understands the knight best stands on g3, because it is pretty much a common understanding of the Nimzo players, those of them who have studied Nimzo at a good level, and definitely Ding has studied it. He's playing the World Championship after all. The knight on g3 allows him to carry out inevitably e4. And there's not much black can do. Of course, black could play d5 at some point. There's going to be other issues with this move, which I'm not going to talk about here. So Nepomniatchtchi played pretty normal. He blocked these pawns. He was trying to generate some counterplay. Knight g3, knight c6, and another rook a2. Yeah, pretty insane move. But again, this is like a déjà vu. If you were watching this bootcamp from the start, do you remember Magnus's move rook b7 against MVL? This Rossolimo line, where MVL's queen takes on the e4 was met by f6, knight h6, bishop g7, knight f7, etc. This is exactly the same idea. Early rook lift, just in case this rook on the second rank is going to be doing great things, and as it happens, this was a brilliant idea. This was definitely preparation sledgehammer, absolutely. But I think it makes perfect sense. And if you check the engine initially hates it. It says this is nothing. You can't play like this. But it's very difficult for black to understand how to properly meet this. And Nepomniatchtchi was meeting in a traditional way. He played b6, e4. There you go. One problem solved. This bishop is a good piece. This knight on g3 is a good piece. So all that white is left is these double pawns. And Nepomniatchtchi decided to go after this pawn. And in the end, we enter this very sharp position where Ding Laurent sacrificed the pawn and got a very nice position. And in the end, he was winning, but the game finished in a draw. Again, doesn't really matter. It's not really important. Again, we are focusing on this moment, right? That we cannot think a little basic. Sometimes we can do that. But if you're going to play a little basic, like knight f3, bishop d3, shoot castle, you're going to miss a lot moments. And maybe finally I'm going to show you what's a permanently bad piece. As a final example, one of the games of this championship match of Jan Nepomniatchtchi against Ding Laurent, whichever game it was, game 3, 4, I don't remember. You remember, here Ding Laurent played e4, shoot castle, bishop e2, and I think it was like knight h5, right? I think it was knight h5. And then after d4, here Nepomniatchtchi, for whatever reason, played bishop f4, which I didn't like it, right? I think it was queen f6, pretty necessary move. Anyway, I think I have to explain why Ding Laurent did play e4 and not d4, the typical Nimzo move. Because it's basically déjà vu from the previous game. I just showed to you why white is not entering the same position. Do you see where this knight is standing? On f3. So in the previous game, the queen was on d1, the pawn was on a3. Ding Laurent played knight e2, knight g3, rook a2, and eventually pushed e4. So where's the danger here? Why this is a bad idea for white? Black can close the position by first training one bishop pair. So white is losing one of the biggest advantages he has, is the bishop pair. Yeah, maybe let's make some random move here. Do you see? Do you see this bishop on c1? This is a permanently bad piece. How come? It cannot join the game by any means. You cannot go to f4. You cannot go to a3. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you could argue. Maybe in the long term, you can play bishop d2, f3, bishop e1, bishop h4, and somehow this bishop joins the game. Okay, let's not completely write it down. But I think while this is happening, definitely white is going to lose something on the queen side, right? So it just takes too slow. And this is very close, if not already, a permanently bad piece. So, okay, to make it permanently permanent, you can put the pawn on g3. That's it. Then this bishop on c1 is dead. It's just not joining the game because bishop a3 always is b6 and black is never going to take on d4 if at least he's not winning the pawn on c4. So this bishop is essentially killing white's game. Now you know. All right. In a nutshell, that was it. That was it. That was everything I wanted to tell you about temporary bad pieces. Just to summarize what we learned, in most occasions, they are knights. I'm sorry, my apologies. In most occasions, they're bishops. Like this very famous example, again, let me show it to you. Like this game. Where was this? Again, let me try to pull it up. Here, right? Like this game against Magnus Carlsen against Maxime Vachier Lagrave. So this was very deep understanding that first, he voluntarily imprisons his bishop. Second, he removes his opponent any pawn play, so there is no e5, there is no c5. Third, he makes sure there is no counterattack for white, like g5. Now this bishop looks so bad, but then at some point, inevitably, a couple of moves later, this bishop jumps to life and essentially destroys white's position.